James Damore, thank you for joining me. You are a hero to some, a villain probably to about the same number of people. You are the author of the now infamous Google Memo. I like to think of you also as the first moment in a new wave of resistance against a sort of stifling, politically correct culture in corporate America. But we'll talk about that in a minute. First of all, by now, most people are familiar with what you did. You wrote a memo, which I thought was very carefully, reasonably, and generously worded about political culture, corporate culture at Google, the sorts of things you're allowed to say and not allowed to say. And that memo included some references to scientific findings about the differences between men and women. Now, what happened since, most people by now will know, but what I want to get to in this interview, the heart of it, is why you did it. So you come to the interview today in a T-shirt that suggests to me that you have a little troll in you. There's a little mischievous pot stirrer in James Damore. So I get the impression you're smart enough to know what was going to happen when you did this. So why did you do it?
I think maybe I don't think I was really smart enough to know what was going to happen, but I just really felt like some things need to be said, and they just weren't. So I was willing to put my name down and just say what I needed to say. I really didn't think that I would be fired, though.
Right. You must have had some awareness from maybe following the trajectory of this debate, let's say, in the public square, how vilified people are for stepping outside the politically correct consensus. I mean, the subject of your memo itself contained your own fate. You know, I mean, you sort of indirectly predicted your own end at Google as a result of it. You must have had some awareness of the fact that it would be at least controversial. I think it took a lot of bravery to put your name to it, which vanishingly few people in American public life are prepared to do. I almost didn't do this interview because I was very angry at you for stealing my crown of America's most famous woman hater. But no, you knew you'd get some kind of notoriety from it, you know, which I'm sure that it wasn't your primary objective. I believe you, and I've seen you in other interviews, I believe you that you wanted to do it because you felt that something had to be said. When it all started kicking off, when the media began to report your memo as being an example of sort of misogynistic dude bro culture, misrepresenting its contents, proving your point for you, in other words, talk me through the sequence of events. Obviously, it was circulating on one of Google's internal systems, and then it started to attract attention. I first became aware of it when, and we're going to talk about the contents a little bit later, but I first became aware of it when I saw it reproduced, I think, on Engadget, where they had removed all of your footnotes and all of your references and then proceeded to refer to it as poorly sourced or poorly researched or something like that. And I noticed it immediately because you can tell from the way that it's written that there was a footnote or there was a note there. Because, you know, when people write, that you can tell when you can sort of pick it up as a journalist. I knew that there was a link to something there, you know, that had been stripped out. When this started to circulate, what was going through your head? What were you thinking when your co-workers, for instance, started putting this controversy and you together? I just want to understand the process between you releasing this and the cataclysm that followed. What was the atmosphere like at Google, and what did you experience?
Yeah, so I guess I initially shared it about a month and a half ago, actually, to the diversity programs, and they just ignored it. And
surprise, surprise.
Yeah, and I mean, I sent it to some individual Googlers, and they actually had some reasoned discussion, but it was only after it became viral and it was obvious that many people were actually agreeing with it that all this outrage started to happen.
Interesting. So you only became a figure of hate when you started to become dangerous.
Right.
When you were just a sort of lone dissenting voice, they didn't care too much about you. But when it became clear that you had support they needed to squash it immediately.
Right.
How did that manifest itself? Like, just sort of what did you get calls? Did you get like called into your manager's office? Did you get co-workers sort of like looking at you weirdly? What happened?
A lot of it was just these public posts that like my VP would post where he just says, "Oh, this is harmful. Don't even look at it. This is not us." And then you'd see all these people, "Oh yeah, he's just a misogynist," and all these things. He's providing this platform to just crucify his own employee, which is really bad. I was sent into HR, but they told me, "Yeah, we can't take this down because this is just political speech and you can't censor this." And I told them explicitly so many of the actual illegal discrimination that's happening in the company. And they're like, "Oh, yeah, okay, we'll follow up."
Of course, never having any intention of doing so.
Yeah.
So you started to get the attention of your bosses, your managers, and then as it spiraled out of control and became a public issue, I guess then you started to hear about yourself indirectly. You start to see statements appear in the press about this controversy that you didn't know were coming, like the CEO says something or the vice president of diversity or whatever. It sort of spirals out of your control, and you feel like you're in the center of the tornado at that point, I guess. Were you scared at any point? Were you enjoying it? The reason I ask is I believe you when you say that the reason you did this is because it needed to be said. But you have taken to the controversy quite enthusiastically. And you show up in provocative T-shirts. I love one. I want one. You've given interviews to people on the internet who would not be considered, who are not mainstream media people, who are quite partisan on particular issues. Let's put it like that. You seem to have embraced the attention this has brought you. In the initial stages, when you were being mischaracterized, when you were being called names, when all this was spiraling out of control, were you scared? Were you enjoying the process? Was it just all a bit bewildering and you were sort of taking it second by second? How having sort of taken the plunge and been like, you know what, sorry, I'll just do it and press publish. Like between that and getting fired, let's say, what's the sort of emotional trajectory you went through?
Yeah, so it was a ton of stress, and at least I've begun to understand that when you're really stressed, you start seeing threats everywhere. So, while I was at work, if anyone would start talking to me, I would immediately be like, "Oh man, are you trying to attack me or something?" And there were some people that sent some personal threats to me, but
from within the company.
Yeah.
And what did they say? What kind of thing?
I'll hunt you down, and it's either you or me. One of us is going to leave.
People making specific physical threats against you from within the Google.
Yeah, it was pretty bad. I don't know if they've ever cracked down on this at Google because there were so many horrible aspects of our culture that really rose to the surface in this controversy.
Well, let's talk about that. Let's take it away from you for a second. How would you characterize the atmosphere at Google? I mean, you pretty much said what you think in your memo, but flesh that out a little bit for us. Give us a sense of what the atmosphere is like. I want to know, would you be able to have the kind of conversation we're having? Talk about maybe, Jonathan Haidt's studies, or about, cognitive difference, about population distribution. Would you be able to have a discussion about studies and science as they pertain to gender differences in the same way that I'm sure people at Google have science-based discussions on every other subject under the sun? Could you walk into the canteen and start talking about this stuff, or would you have to do it under sort of, under guard or anonymously on the message boards or what?
Yeah, you have to be really courageous to have one of these conversations. So I discussed some of this stuff with my coworkers beforehand, and every time they just look at me and just try to shame me into silence and say like, "Oh no, that's not true. This is all socially constructed. What are you talking about?" And then I would have to, provide all the evidence. While, if it was the reverse thing, they would just take it for granted,
What happens when you provide all of the evidence? I've been through this process myself, of course.
Yeah.
When, and you're a mild-mannered, reasonable person. When you are clearly not a monster, when you express opinions that people are horrified by, and then you then provide them the evidence, and you say, well, here's where I'm coming from. Here are the studies I've read. What have you got? What's their next step after that?
I think they just choose to not really intellectually engage and just go to a lower level of, there's no way for you to actually believe this. You must be a sexist.
So you'll provide studies, and their response will be emotional rather than, oh, well, let me look at the numbers or something.
Yeah.
And this is an example, I think, of what a lot of people watching this will have seen elsewhere in culture, which is this sort of triumph of feelings over facts, the social justice mania that is preventing people from looking dispassionately, with reason and logic, at problems.
Mm-hmm.
What I wanted to ask you about was this oppressive political climate that you describe in the memo. How dangerous is it, and how far does it spread?
Yeah, so it's definitely dangerous, and it's affected many of our products. So YouTube in particular, they often go after right-wing YouTube uploaders, and it may not be that they're purposely just saying, oh yeah, we don't like this person, therefore let's cancel their account or demonetize their stuff, but the way that their bias goes into the actual algorithms that label which videos are harmful, that actually has a huge effect. And we've seen it a lot, at least anecdotally, with a lot of the conservative YouTube uploaders. And then,
because YouTube's one of those places conservatives love to hang out. It seems to be one of the platforms that libertarians and conservatives have taken to really enthusiastically. There's a huge ecosystem of people who basically give their opinion for a living and hope to hit a sort of a level of monetization with page views and all the rest of it. They can make a living on it. So I know people who 2 years ago were making $20,000, $30,000 a month, which is a perfectly nice income for somebody. You can support a family on that. But they've discovered their videos being what they describe as systematically demonetized in a way that their ideological opponents have not.
Mm-hmm.
You can understand why people are so angry, and I think that's the key to understanding why people are so grateful to you for shedding some light on this. Now, I want to talk a little bit specifically about some of the stuff in the memo, if we can, because you are highly qualified in this stuff. You have qualifications from Harvard. You know your biology, and you've been lectured in the media by people whose greatest accomplishment in life is opening a Tumblr account. What is it? You're masters in biology, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So you know your stuff here, and your memo is the way that it has been mischaracterized is amazing to me, because you say what the studies say, which is that there's not necessarily a difference of ability between men and women, and there's certainly no reason to point, to treat individuals, because you're talking about distributions. There's no reason to treat individual women as though they're likely to be less good at a job than individual men. What your memo talks about, which is what the studies say, is it's not about ability, it's about willing. Women tend not to choose to do certain things. This has been completely mischaracterized, utterly misrepresented. Before we get into some of the science behind it, are you at all surprised, having obviously for some time been aware of the issues in Google and probably in the media too, were you surprised at just how devious and mendacious and wicked the press would be with this?
Yeah, I was definitely surprised.
Because they know better.
Yeah.
Because I'm getting tired now of giving reporters the benefit of the doubt. Yeah, yes, they are dumb. They're dumb as a box of bricks in some cases, but not all of them. And some of them know better. And some of them report on this stuff for a living. And when you see Engadget strip out your references, and then to add insult to injury, and the chutzpah of stripping out your references and then calling it poorly sourced, that's on purpose. That's deliberate mendacity. That is lying to their readers. And I saw that systematically across the press everywhere your memo was mentioned. Did that surprise you, or is that how you view the press too?
Now I can see why they did it, but I definitely didn't realize really just how biased some of the media is. Especially, this document is out there, so
people can read it. It's like the thing that always makes me laugh about these journalists is, it's like, how dumb do you think your readers are? Here it is. You can find it You can see the references. You can think for yourself. And you're telling me things about it that are demonstrably not true, counting on me not having time to check. Well, guess what? You lied to me about the last election. You lied to me about Islam. You lied to me about immigration. You lied to me about all kinds of things. Why do you think I'm just going to automatically assume you're telling the truth about this? No, I'm going to check. And when I check, the person I think badly of is not James Damore, it's you. Because yet again, you lied to me about something else. I don't understand. I don't understand why they think we're so stupid. That people can't read, that they're not capable of examining a document for themselves. It's a very remarkable thing. The intolerance you describe in Google and the mendacity that you've experienced in the media has proven your point for you, although it's come at a personal cost. You lost your job, and your future employability, I suppose, rests on finding someone who is going to enjoy the controversy you've stoked rather than be terrified by it.
Yeah.
Are you happy with how things went down?
Definitely not. I mean, I really like Google, and I mean, I left my PhD program at Harvard just to join Google, so it was definitely a company that I really loved and wanted to improve, and to show how intolerant they are it proves my point, but it not in a very good way.
They call it a Pyrrhic victory, I think, right? You win, but at such terrible expense that it would be better if you hadn't fought. Yeah. Do you know what you're going to do next?
Not really.
I suppose right now you're kind of consumed with people wanting to hear your opinion on every conceivable subject and desperate to pore over this endlessly.
Yeah.
It's terrifying, really, because I see you. I don't mind admitting. I don't think it's going to be a secret to anyone watching that I admire what you've done. Particularly because it's come at a personal cost. It's easy to do it when there's no cost to you. Being very left-wing in public, on any subject, whether it's race or gender, comes with no personal risk.
Yeah.
But even being fact-oriented or libertarian, never mind Republican, comes at personal risk. If you work for a large corporation, or in the media, or you're in Hollywood, or you're in the academy, you're in pretty much any job that matters to society, it comes with huge risks attached if you don't sign up to this stuff. So I do admire you, and I don't mind admitting it. But I worry for you, because I see you as the first big head above the parapet in what will undoubtedly be 30 years of defiance and rejection of this politically correct orthodoxy, and more and more and more mischief-making on the part of people who believe in fact, reason, and logic over dogma and feelings. Mm-hmm. But you are something like patient zero. So, do you think Harvard will take you back? Maybe. I'm wondering, because I was thinking to myself in the car on the way here this morning. I said, well, the poor guy's not going to get a job in Silicon Valley. Academia is just as bad. Yeah. Media is just as bad. What is he going to do with himself? Have you given it any more thought than?
Yeah. I'm still overwhelmed with everything. I really don't have a clear vision of what I want to do.
In your memo, you describe some, and this is the Jonathan Haidt research. Mm-hmm. You talk about how libertarian and conservative viewpoints, there's sort of an instinctive moral frameworks that seem to map onto political ideologies. Nobody knows if they have basis in biology or whatever, but it seems to be the case that conservatives are keen on, well, as the name suggests, a slower pace of change, and those who vote liberal tend to enjoy, stirring things up, messing things up. Do you think that the social justice mania, and it seems to be a sort of mania in the technical sense, that's taken root in American culture, do you think it's partly got to do with this, liberals just like change for its own sake? So it almost doesn't matter what they fixate on. They just want something to blow up. And social justice has become this thing that they can all work together to set, incendiary charges, to just set charges all over society with, and all back each other up in all circumstances. do you think that aspect of liberal psychology is part of the reason why this is so difficult to beat?
Yeah, there's definitely the aspect where they want to change things, and once they've defeated all overt signs of racism and sexism, they have to go to the even smaller aspects of these microaggressions. And
when you've run out of things to complain about,
yeah.
You have to make up these new amazing things. Sort of, it's like when you've run out of people who are really racist, you have to broaden the definition to include people who are being racist without even realizing it, and new, subtle, insidious kinds of racism that no one's ever thought of before. And the same happens with sexism, with microaggressions, manspreading, mansplaining, manslamming. You know about manslamming?
No.
Manslamming is when you manslamming is when you walk down the sidewalk, and it was invented by some idiotic New Yorker writer, of course, or somebody like that. And it's the idea, women have apparently observed that men are less likely to move out of the way for you than women are on the sidewalk. So, imagine this. You've got all these angry feminist bloggers in New York determinedly marching down the street, crashing into men, and then using that, deliberately causing these collisions on the sidewalk, and then using that as evidence that men are sexist in this new way, which is not getting out of the way for women as often as women get out of the way for men. This is some sort of mental dysfunction. This is people with nothing left to complain about, isn't it? All right. Now I do have. I said I was gonna call you on something, and I do have part of your memo that I was upset with you about, and I want you to tell me that you put it in just to pander to people, just to make the whole thing more palatable. Because look. There are people who share your opinions who don't say it the way you say it. There are people who share your opinions who are a lot ruder than you.
Yeah.
In fact, pretty much everyone I've ever met who shares your opinions is ruder than you, me included. So I want to read you something that was in the memo. Feminism has made great progress in freeing women from the female gender role, but men are still very much tied to the male gender role. If we as a society allow men to be more feminine, then the gender gap will shrink, although probably because men will leave tech and leadership for traditionally feminine roles. There's an assumption buried in here that gender roles are harmful and that they constitute a problem. Now, most of the people who agree with you on the biological basis for differing career preferences, for instance, and some of the other things you mentioned in your memo would dispute that. They would probably say there is a biological basis for male attributes, which is what gives rise to the differing male preferences in certain careers, just as there are biological bases for certain female attributes and characteristics, which are what give rise to women's different career choices. Mm-hmm. So, did you put that in just to pander to liberals, just to get this memo, just to sort of to sugarcoat the pill, or do you think? Neither of us is the most masculine. Neither of us is like a Conan the Barbarian type. Were you talking about yourself? Were you doing a little pandering to kind of get it past people? What was going on in that sentence? Because it stuck out to me as something that didn't really fit. It wasn't quite coherent with the rest of your argument.
Yeah, so it's definitely not necessarily in the same line of reasoning as a lot of the document, but I do think that the gender roles have some. They're not arbitrary, right? They are likely influenced by biology, but just as there are people that are outliers, and some women are obsessed with coding, just as maybe there's more men that are. There are some men that maybe want to be more feminine, but just can't because of society. So I don't think masculinity is necessarily bad for men, just that some men don't want to be as masculine. Mm-hmm. And society pushes men to be more masculine, then they do push females to be feminine.
It seems to me, that's a perfectly reasonable position. It seems to me that it's sort of like the fat-shaming argument. The feminists are worried about women being encouraged to be too thin, when really the problem is not anorexia, it's obesity. And for me, you worrying about the clutch of men who want to be more feminine, well, it seems to me that the problem is not too many men are masculine. The problem is too many men are feminine already, and women aren't very happy about it, and men aren't very happy about it. And if there is a socialized gender role for men, it has become so feminized over the last couple of decades that actually the problem is exactly the opposite from the one that you suggest in the memo. But your position is perfectly reasonable, so I understand that. I accept that. Now, here's one part of your memo that I liked and which must have horrified the left. You talk about demoralizing diversity. Can you explain what you meant by that?
So at Google and a lot of these institutions, we actually place diversity as an actual moral good, like protecting children. There's...
Yeah, it's sort of like Germans see the European Union as just a sort of unarguable principle of natural law.
Right.
It's like any right-thinking, normal person must, of course, want to be a member of Europe. You're saying it's the same kind of like reflexive devotion to the cult of whatever.
Yeah. So just as we would never do anything that would ever cause more harm to children, and we'd be able to spend tons of money on it, not really looking at the actual costs and benefits, the same happens with diversity, where we're not even looking at the actual costs and benefits. We're just, oh yeah, diversity is good, therefore here's another 100 million.
Yeah.
And anyone that questions our religion of diversity is a sexist and is evil, and we have to punish him.
Well, during the Gamergate controversy, which we won't get into today, Intel, I think, put aside, was it like 100 million or something for diversity and inclusion initiatives, the same budgetary period as they removed that amount from R&D. They're literally taking money out of developing new, better products to keep feminists happy. It's almost like it's become... I spoke to somebody about this the other day who works for one of the big tech firms, and he said that this has become a sort of racket, this equality and diversity and social justice stuff. In Silicon Valley, it's become like a cost of doing business. It's almost like a different kind of tax. So if you want to have a tech company, you've got to pay your taxes to the government, and you also have to pay your dues to the social justice industry. Because if you don't, they'll come for you. They'll start asking why. They'll say, why don't you have an allocation for, disabled women of color or whatever at your code conference? Why do we have to pay the same ticket price as all of these privileged straight white males? If you don't bend over backwards to make these people happy, they'll come for you. Well, there's a problem here. And it's a problem that conservatives in the broader culture wars have known for quite some time. And it's that these people are never happy. And the more you give them, the more they want. And they won't be happy until 100% of your budget is spent on diversity and inclusion initiatives and nothing is spent on the stated goal of the business itself any longer. So, people who've been fighting culture wars for conservatives, not that there are many of them, certainly not very effective, in other areas, are sort of looking aghast at this one bit of America that should be, red-blooded capitalism, red in tooth and claw, and actually seeing it become totally co-opted by, what I suppose most conservatives would call cultural Marxism. And it's distressing for a company that is, Google's reputation was synonymous with science. The name of it is is an abstract mathematical term. Everything about it suggested this sort of brilliant algorithmic genius that was out of the reach of mere mortals. That this was a place where, people like me can't get jobs because we're not smart enough, but people like you can create algorithms to discover anything about the world, the rest of it. And now the reputation seems to be changing, and now and I think it's deserved. I want to ask you about one example, actually, now I think about it. Do you know about the American inventors search result example?
Oh, yeah.
So if you search for... This is so funny. It's the journalist problem again. It's like, why do they do this? If you search for American inventors in the American version of Google in English, in US English, you will be presented with a smorgasbord of different coloured and gendered faces. And you won't have heard of any of them. Maybe one one terrible white male in the list. But if you go to Spanish Google and you put American inventors in Spanish, into Spanish Google, you get Bell, you get Edison, you get Einstein, you get people who actually did, invent the stuff that powers the world around us. The inescapable conclusion of this, and it's the same as the conclusion that a lot of YouTubers have done with their experiments around monetization, is that there is silent gerrymandering going on a massive scale. If I search for American inventors, I expect to see a list of the people who invented the important stuff, not Google's vision of what the world ought to have been like. And that's what I think worries people. Within Google, who is responsible for gerrymandering results like that? Like, what team does it? Who does it? I mean, are there really Google engineers, people as smart as you, whose job it is to lie, to create these fake, man-made, arbitrary results that don't reflect history or reality in order to present a picture of the universe that Google wishes were true but isn't? Who does that in Google?
So I think it's mainly just the angry mob that whenever they find one of these things, they instantly just complain, and then the team themselves don't want to really stand up to them, so they just give in. And this happened with doodles too, and where we see the same sort of pattern.
Where you don't get doodles for Easter, but you get them for Ramadan.
Yeah, or you don't even get Albert Einstein. You get these random people.
People no one's ever heard of because they happen to be black or they happen to be a woman. Yeah. It's just, my worry is that at some point conservatives are going to have had enough, and they're going to start opting out of things. I mean, we're going to have some sort of Matt Damon Elysium future where liberals are living on gilded pleasure boats up in the sky somewhere, and Republicans are all working in factories because they just gave up on the internet. Because it was like, anytime I go to the internet, you're going to lie to me, so I'm going to stop doing it. Civilization did function before Google, which I think sometimes Silicon Valley forgets. I mean, yes, our life is immeasurably better because we have the internet and we have iPhones. But, human civilization did exist before them. And Republicans in particular, being more rural, being more, being less likely to spend as much time on technology as liberals do in some cases, less tech savvy, whatever. There are plenty of people who live in America who wouldn't miss large chunks of what other people consider to be human rights in technology. People who would be perfectly happy reading books instead of surfing the internet. Do you think Silicon Valley forgets that sometimes? Doesn't realize the risk to its own business of alienating half the country with what is effectively just far left activism masquerading as an impartial product?
Yeah, I think they really just don't even understand the other half of the country. They just assume that conservatives are just dumb and evil, and so we're doing the right thing in censoring them and in just.
It's a sort of moral imperative to lie because there's a sense of higher moral purpose.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I mean, they don't see their own bias at all, so they're not even aware of it. It
mystifies me because their own employees don't agree with them. And I dug up some statistics about you, and it said 64% of Uber employees disagreed with the decision to fire you. Upwards of 50% of Google employees. So over half of your former colleagues disagreed with the decision to fire you. Uber, I have a feeling Uber is a little bit more right-wing than a lot of the other...
Or they're just tired of... I mean, I at least heard some of the firings were just someone said a joke at Uber and then they got fired because they've gotten so sensitive with all of those controversies.
Yeah, I mean, maybe that's another backlash. There's something waiting to happen there. But there's more. 56%, you probably know these numbers already. Of course you do. 56% of Facebook employees disagreed with the decision. I mean, that's extraordinary. I mean, if you think about Facebook, and 54% of Amazon employees also disagreed with the decision to fire you. So these companies, their own employees don't uniformly agree with the decision. In fact, these numbers seem to suggest that the troops in tech companies have politics that, sort of broadly speaking, reflect the country. It's the people who run these businesses that don't. The executives, the people in leadership positions who uniformly sign up to this ludicrous nonsense. This is why Trump's in office, isn't it? Because the management of these companies is out of touch with their own employees. Politicians are out of touch with the electorate. academics are out of touch with everybody. Hollywood producers are out of touch with their own consumers, which is why the head of the Paramount studio said, I might be a Hillary supporter, but I'm not going to allow that to influence my decision-making in greenlighting movies. He made a point of saying that to the Hollywood Reporter because Hollywood realizes its politics are so out of whack with everybody. I mean, this is why Trump is in office. Because of this refusal to treat people with different points of view as human beings.
Yeah.
And that's what I've seen with you. And I think it's Jonathan Haidt too, isn't it, who did the research that showed that conservatives were able to put themselves in the minds of liberals fairly well. They were able to identify with liberals, to empathize with them, to present their arguments accurately. But liberals were very bad at doing it to conservatives, and they tended to fall back on name-calling rather than presenting, let's say, a robust free market defense for something. They would just say, oh, they're just sexist and racist. Obviously, you've become a bit of a hero for some right-wingers, because finally there's somebody on the inside of one of these evil citadels, who's been like, you know what's fun watching you? It's like everything we always thought was true, and we always kind of knew, but we never had the evidence for, and we were always caught. It's like if you wait long enough, every vast right-wing conspiracy becomes reality. It's like I don't expect you to agree with that, but it's it's like you wait long enough, and it's like, see all that stuff we were telling you. The Hillary autocomplete results for the last election. Mm-hmm. Okay, so you worked there. Right. Hillary doesn't autocomplete properly. Trump autocompletes to all these disobliging, horrible things. Google says, oh, it was a mistake with the algorithm. What happened? They're lying,
I don't
right?
know.
Well, they must be lying.
At least they've been lying about some of these PR things for me. So
about you?
Yeah. So, I mean, it's within their realm to maybe lie about this, but I don't actually know the specifics for that.
It's just, I think it gets to a critical mass where there's so many inexplicable algorithmic errors, all seemingly somehow benefiting the Democrats or pointing in a leftward direction, that people at the end of it are like, all right, I gave you a pass, I gave you a pass, I gave you a pass, I gave you a pass. Now we're up to now we've had enough, and now we want to know what's going on. Wasn't Silicon Valley kind of founded by libertarians? Shouldn't these companies have libertarian politics? Maybe you could. I've always wondered this. I wanted to write a book about it once, and I never did. Maybe I will one day, but. In your experience, because you have more insight into this than I do, how did this happen? What were the steps? What were the concrete events that led a company like Google from what were presumably libertarian founding ideals to being a slave to conspiracy theories? Mm-hmm. How did Silicon Valley go this way? Because it's happened quickly. The old Silicon Valley companies weren't like this. The previous generation weren't like this. But the social media generation of companies in Google, they are like it. Why are they like it, and how did it happen? Yeah,
so I agree that they start libertarian or progressive because they need to change the world, But, and many of the individual coders are very much just libertarian, very logical, and not emotion-based at all. But as there's the outside pressure and people see that, there's only 20% women and, these guys are all socially awkward. They may make this, not as welcoming to women. Therefore, we need to change all this. And so it's not necessarily even the coders themselves that have brought this progressive ideology on, but a lot of the HR and diversity programs that have.
It can feel to me as an outside observer as though it's a sort of parallel parasitic industry that has attached itself to the productive bit of the tech economy and simply exists to engorge itself on productive bits of these companies, to enlarge its purview, to increase its influence, to terrorize people, to perpetuate, as government departments and charities do, to perpetuate its own existence, almost irrespective of the merits in question, And it's this sort of entire parallel parasitic ecosystem that it's like fish that have the bacteria living in their teeth, Yeah. Except these bacteria rot the teeth and kill the fish, It's this weird thing, and I kind of think, well, if that just went away, wouldn't everything get immeasurably better and happier? And when people stopped thinking about this stuff, wouldn't the problem correct itself? If only we weren't constantly creating racial and sexual and intergender tensions between people all the time, making people so conscious. This is what upsets me about it, really. When you talk about the feminism stuff and the race stuff, and I don't want to get into race with you, but making people think about this stuff all the time, making them conscious of it, creates problems where there weren't any before. Like these women at Google who've run to the Guardian and said, I was so offended by this memo that said women are prone to neuroses that I'm staying home. And it was like, you have to take a deep breath to respond in any other way than laughter. But I feel sorry for them. They're creations of this climate of fear, this climate of mistrust between the sexes, this climate of hostility between the genders that doesn't need to exist. It's absolutely extraordinary, the sort of outpouring of maudlin self-pity and fact-free emotional drivel that this summary of a few studies has produced in people. It's very powerful. It's a very, very good troll. I'm very jealous. The best trolls are the truth. The best trolls are just quietly, politely, insistently reminding people of the facts. They're the best ones of all.
I mean, I don't think this would have been as big of a thing if it was really just this huge sexist document that I wrote. I mean, the fact that it was actually reasonably well reasoned.
That's what makes them so angry. That's why they're so mad, because they know you're right. And because you're so reasonable about it. Mm-hmm. Now, you don't have to be reasonable to make them mad. That's why I have a career. But you do have to be right, because nobody gets angry like people get angry about the truth. Yeah. Inconvenient truths, unsayable truths. These are the things that keep people up at night. For the sake of argument, let's assume that we are both American Enterprise Institute scholars or researchers for Republican senator or something. Let's assume that we are Republicans. How do we fix this problem?
It's definitely a hard one. And one suggestion would have been to actually regulate Google and make it a public commodity, which I'm sort of hesitant about just because I don't really want the government to control so much. But that would be one way to at least enforce some of the freedom of speech and other aspects that we would want from this information gateway. But other than that, there are some specific things that I believe Google is doing illegally. Like, they are actually using someone's race or gender in a lot of their decisions at Google. And so cracking down on that would at least shed some light on some of the questionable things that they're doing.
And they do that to lower the bar for entry, presumably for jobs. Is that your suggestion?
Well, yeah, they always claim that it's not lowering the bar, but I mean, when you look at it, just statistically, it is effectively lowering the bar.
Well, it's the same as women in the military. They can't pass they cannot meet the physical demands of men, so they have separate, different qualifications to get them in to combat units, for instance. I don't see the press crusading on behalf of the people left behind by those kinds of illegal practices if they're happening.
Yeah.
It's this is something that tests the very limits of and I'm probably more of a social conservative than you, I'm guessing, speculating. You're more of a libertarian guy. I'm probably, I'm not a Republican, but maybe closer, But this tests the limits of our conservative and libertarian beliefs, because this is encroaching on the rights of private corporations to operate as they please. But we do wade in when other companies in other industries hold monopolies and act improperly. If it's oil or finance, we have no hesitation whatsoever in telling those people how to conduct their business. We don't stop ourselves from lecturing almost every other industry on how to conduct its affairs. But tech seems to get a pass. We were told by Republican types, oh, well, wait long enough and things will adjust themselves. But it's not happening.
Yeah.
It's not happening. And as a result of this hands-off, blind adherence to free market principles in when it comes to free speech, conservatives and libertarians have lost the academy, lost Hollywood, lost the media, and lost the tech industry. We have to stop putting guardrails in place for ourselves. See, this is why libertarians are all wrong. This is why you guys are so wrong about everything, because left to our own devices, people make a mess. Like, people cannot organize themselves and cannot live good lives with no guardrails and no guidelines whatsoever. And this is what this is Feuerbach. It's like you don't have to be religious to appreciate what religion brings to society. You can look at. So Feuerbach said, if you look at a religion, it'll tell you what that culture values. Whether you believe in God or not, who cares? But Christianity says good things about, in my view, Christianity says good things about the cultures because its highest virtues are self-sacrifice and love. The two virtues that Christ embodies, self-sacrifice and love. Islam doesn't say such good things about human nature, but I'm not going to draw you on that subject.
Yeah, so I'm definitely, so while my morals and just way of thinking is more libertarian, I do definitely try to acknowledge the strengths of different sides. And so, I'll acknowledge that even, the left has some good points when it comes to maybe women's experience in tech, but that's the only viewpoint that's being spoken right now, and they're completely silencing other ones. I guess it's just important to actually have a dialogue and discussion between the two sides, rather than right now it's just a monologue of...
Well, this is what your case illustrates, is that one side is asking for that debate, begging for it, and the other side refuses to show up. Yeah. And worse than that, tries to destroy the reputations and livelihood of people who say, let's have a chat. And that's, I think, where they lose people. Respectable, reasonable, well-mannered, nice people like you don't get any fairer shake than professional provocateurs like me, which makes me think, why be nice? Why be reasonable? Because they're going to hate you anyway. Why be nice? Because they're going to hate you anyway. Why pander to them and give them a little victory here so they listen to the rest of what you're saying? Because they're not going to listen anyway. So you may as well be a bastard and have some fun with it because they're going to hate you no matter what. And this, I think, is what conservatives who are frustrated with the progress of Republicans in the culture wars are always pointing out. And so, it's the Paul Ryan, Marco Rubio problem, right? They pander to the left, they virtue signal to the left, and it's like, these people hate you. They'd see your head on a spike. Why are you saying things to appease them? Just go to war. That's always been my approach. But then again, you have very successfully trolled the left by being reasonable and fact based, which is, I guess it takes all types. I want to ask you about the future of Google and where you see the company headed. And specifically, there's a privacy implication to some of this policy and politics stuff. And I'll ask it in a silly way. Are you worried about Google snitching on people for having the wrong opinions in some way? You could be a bad guy. You could be Richard Spencer. You could be a white nationalist. You could be somebody that neither of us would want to be in a room with. But he has a right to his opinions, as odious as they are. Mm-hmm. And that's where it starts before it creeps up into regular people like us, Like the Daily Stormer getting forced off the internet. I don't want them off the internet. I want them where we can see them. Yeah. I want to know what they're thinking because I want other people to read it too. I don't want Google hiding stuff away where, you could imagine anything. You make it so attractive for people. You make it alluring. You make it, no, but seriously, these people are bad guys. They're monsters in some cases, and they're being made attractive by progressive censorship. Mm-hmm. Like CNN is like creating these white nationalist rallies. I think I don't want to get you into race, but the future for Google, if it starts snitching on people. Well, first of all, do you think it's a possibility? Do you think the company's going to start doing this?
I think, it's definitely a possibility where...
Would they, for instance, offer different products and services to people that their algorithms determined, had hateful opinions? Is that a likely future for Google?
I think it's probably more likely that they'll just offer products that would make them the most money. But there may be certain circumstances where they'll start with the obviously evil people, and then it'll just creep in and like that's why we really just have to fight for the freedom of speech and take sort of the libertarian approach to protect the conservative side. It's
like these companies can be so smart in some ways and so stupid in others. Google must have some of the smartest people in the world working there, and yet nobody in any management position realizes that if you force the Daily Stormer off the internet, you make it attractive.
Yeah.
And Google did it. Google Domains banned them after they moved from whatever the previous one was. Google made a corporate decision to push these horrible people off the internet, turning them into, it's just basic human psychology. You telling me nobody in the building at Google understands like basic human psychology? It's like Madonna's videos in the 1990s, or it's me trying to get my book published. You tell people they can't have something, they want it, and they get attracted by it. They want to know all about it, and you tell them that it's forbidden. That whatever it is in human beings that's broken, that is attracted to the transgressive and the naughty, the mischievous, or whatever, you activate that in the back of the brain. You make it irresistible.
Well,
does no one in Google understand this?
Their response to my paper kind of shows how they don't understand psychology. So,
I guess you're right. And it's just like, do people get stupider the higher in management they get at Google? It's like if you're really dumb, you're only ever going to be on the front lines because the really senior people are just morons. I don't think they are morons. I think they're scared.
Yeah, they're definitely scared. That's why no one in upper management could defend me. They were all doing their virtual signaling because if they said anything supportive, then the angry mob would just go after them too.
Because truthfully, there's no reason to suppose that the front line, let's say 52% of Googlers disagree with you being fired. There's no reason to suppose that number is different in management to an engineering department. It's just that the people in management keep their mouths shut.
Right.
It's probably more like it, right?
Yeah, there may be a combination of they just don't want to say anything, and also there may be some selection bias that happens when they choose who to promote.
Of course, and with so many more vice president and senior vice president positions now being given over to HR, diversity, corporate welfare, you now get these boardrooms stacked with people whose reason for existence has very little to do with what the company's stated purpose is. What happens if conservatives fall out of love with tech? What does society look like then?
I think it would only exacerbate the problem, really. And it would stop any actual dialogue between the two sides, and which would even increase the partisanship. I think it would be a real shame if that happened.
It seems like it would be more than a shame. It seems like it would be some kind of democratic disaster if the primary vehicles through which we come to learn about the world around us and find out information become so poisoned by a particular brand of politics that half the population stop using them or don't trust them, as is perhaps more likely. Keep using them but don't believe what they say, which is the case. This is the situation the media is now in.
Yeah.
That loss of trust in institutions and in the establishment, it seems to me, is about to flood out into tech, where tech almost got away with it for a while. People almost believed that Twitter was the free speech wing of the free speech party. They almost believed that Facebook just wanted to connect everybody, and they almost believed that that Google was this brilliant algorithmic, mastermind place that just wanted to
do no evil.
Do no evil, right? I don't think anybody believes any of those things anymore. And if trust in tech companies sinks to the levels that it is in for the media, was it 39% of the population believe the media tells the truth? Like, it's bad. It's bad. This is going to be catastrophic for everybody. And there's more of a real democratic crisis if Google doesn't function.
Right.
If this company, which extends into all of our lives, my life wouldn't function without Google services. My whole company would freeze up. What did you like most about working there?
The free food.
Come on.
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah, it was good.
It that good? What was your favorite Google lunch?
It was just free food, and I just love free.
Okay, well, you're a libertarian. Okay, but I mean, all right, fine. You like the free food, fair enough. I think I would probably like free food if I worked in there as well. Despite the fact that you love the free food at Google, and despite the fact that we started this interview with you telling me that you love the company, you are now taking legal action against them, aren't you? Are you going to win?
I think so, but
tell
I'm not a lawyer,
tell me briefly how you're doing it, what kind of case it is, what the grounds are.
Yeah, I guess there's multiple different ways that we may go about it. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, and there's some multiple things that they did against me. So there was a lot of defamation. They, even lied to me publicly, or lied about me. Mm-hmm. And also, I was pointing out illegal things that they were doing in my document.
Yes.
And then they fired me.
I see.
And I even complained that they were suppressing my viewpoint and my concerted right to have this political action, and then they fired me. Mm-hmm. So there was a lot of retaliation.
Right, from them, to add, insult to the public injury that you had suffered at the hands of the press. Mm-hmm. Well, we don't know where you're going to go from here. We don't know what your career is going to look like, but you've acquired a sort of like a cult following now. And I think that your cult following is probably quite broad. I don't think it's as partisan as maybe it looks on the surface. I think many people are quietly cheering you on, which some of those numbers from Amazon and Facebook and Uber suggest is probably the case. Mm-hmm. People see you as a sort of bit of a brave trailblazer in this, and maybe just the first one of a trend to come. If you could speak directly to all of the people who have become aware of this stuff because of you and have been emboldened by you, what would your advice to them be? Do you want other people to be like you? Do you want more whistleblowers and more people falling on swords? Do you think it's better that people stay quiet and get on with their jobs? What's your message to people who are inspired, I guess, by what you've done?
Yeah, I guess I can't really suggest doing exactly what I did, just because there were a lot of costs.
It would be irresponsible. Yeah. Not everybody wants to be consigned to a life of being lied about by journalists.
Yeah, I think maybe they can start small, though, and a lot of the culture things that I was talking about, just the political intolerance that was happening, a lot of people, even progressives, can sympathize with that. You shouldn't be intolerant to this minority within the population, and once you start allowing dialogue, then you'll actually hopefully organically get this other side of the diversity debate.
I was very surprised to see Fareed Zakaria, who is not somebody that I normally agree with on very much, give an address, and I was there because a friend of mine was graduating, give the commencement address at Bucknell, which is a little liberal arts college in Pennsylvania. And he addressed the faculty directly and said that conservatives were like an endangered species on campus, and they were like a minority that needed to be protected. Yeah. And he didn't mean it as a joke. He was being serious. And the more that stuff starts to happen, and I give him great credit for that. I'd never really liked the guy much before that, but when I saw him do that, I began to view him in a new light. I think the more people who do that, the more people who speak up as you do, the faster we bring about that day when the stranglehold is broken and the fear is gone. Because this rule by kind of oppressive diktat, by fiat, by the threat of professional disaster and social inconvenience or distress as a way of enforcing conspiracy theories is an untenable position for America to be in.
Yeah.
And it's a position that all four of its most important institutions are now in. Mm-hmm. And I think what you've done is brave, maybe personally reckless, but I'm glad you did it for selfish reasons. And I'm glad you did it because I think you're going to have done you're going to have served the country really, really well. And I would say, as uncertain as your future might look now, and you may be worrying, and you may be, I don't know what your life is like right now. You're getting calls from your mum and dad, I guess, like desperately kind of asking if you're okay, if you need money, like, like, do you want to come home? Whatever your life is like now, I would urge you to remember that you are going to come, I think, historically, to be seen as a major moment. What you have done is a major moment in an inevitable resistance against this stuff. It's my view I kind of watch this stuff for a living. My job is to watch these crazy people. And my observation is that the tide has just turned with you, Gamergate, Trump, all the rest of it. You don't have to support any of those individual causes to recognize what the trend represents, which is a colossal cultural resistance against scolds, nannies, social justice warriors, all those kinds of people who believe that that they should be able to dictate how you live and what you believe without evidence, and always in this particular direction. And I think, as difficult as the next couple of years are going to be for you, that you will come to be seen as an extremely important figure in that moment, in that sea change in American cultural history. So I'm very grateful to you for talking to me. Thank you, and keep up the interviews and keep the faith, and you must keep everybody informed on what you do next, because it's very important. They rule by fear, and they rule because they want everyone to know that if you speak up, this will happen to you. Well, they haven't taken away your spirit, very obviously. They haven't broken you. You showed up to the interview today in a trolley shirt, laughing and smiling, with all with your whole life suddenly up for grabs. And I think it's exciting. And I think what you've done is really important and significant. So thank you very much for joining me. And maybe we'll check in 6 months and see. You'll be running your own business by then. You'll be running a Google competitor by then. But thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah, thanks.
Okay, I think we are therefore ready to go. Okay, so here we go. 3, 2, 1. Joining us from the NPR studios in New York City is Milo Yiannopoulos, a British-born media personality, former senior editor at Breitbart, and author of the new book, Dangerous. So, Milo, first of all, welcome to my show.
Thank you. Thanks so much for having me.
And obviously this is NPR. NPR has a certain kind of reputation. You have a certain kind of reputation.
They don't sound like they go together, do they?
No, I would say the Venn diagram doesn't really overlap all that much.
You'd be surprised.
Yeah,
I might be slumming it on
that.
public radio today, but there are plenty of NPR listeners who are just as upset with the things that I talk about in the book as the conventional Milo audience. So no, I think there's a little Venn diagram, bigger than people realize, and it's bigger than the media realizes. As we saw in the last election, they're very bad at predicting what America cares about.
Right. So that's a great way of answering or beginning to answer what was going to be my next question. I mean, I am going to have listeners because people have in their minds an idea of who you are and what you are. I am going to have listeners who are going to say, why are you putting this guy on the radio? Why are you putting this guy on WNPR? What's your answer to that? What is it about you that's important for people to hear, people maybe in a public radio audience to hear?
Well, I think your typical audience is probably likely to sympathize, where they're conservative at all, with a more establishment Republican vibe. I obviously don't represent that. I represent a much younger, more mischievous, trolly, if you like, youth element of the conservative movement. What's important, because there are so many of us, it's important because we altered the trajectory of the last election. And I'm important because I'm the person that they look up to most after perhaps the president. And, one thing I do say in interviews regularly, particularly in environments like this, is, yes, I'm a provocateur. And yes, I say some outrageous and terrible and rude and mean things to people. Well, let me be clear. I don't want everybody to be like me. But it's important, I think, that there are some people like me. Because I think there's a consensus among conservatives and libertarians of all bents, and even now among some liberals, some progressives, that the boundaries of acceptable speech in American public life have become too narrow. I think there's finally an understanding, finally consensus that conservatives, for instance, have a really rough time on college campuses. And there's beginning to become an acceptance that conservatives don't really get a fair shake in the press either. And I think there's now incontrovertible evidence because of the last election that conservatives are not understood by the media. The media is incapable of reporting accurately and thoroughly and fairly on, a huge swathes of the country that it simply doesn't understand, and it wasn't able to predict, how they would behave in the last election as a result. I represent the younger end of American conservatism, which is utterly sick of hand-wringing, school-marmish political correctness, of people telling us, what jokes we're allowed to tell, what's sexist, what's racist, what's homophobic. The implication being that somehow somebody in a newsroom or on a desk or in a studio somewhere on the coasts knows what's in the hearts of millions of Americans and is able to sort of loftily condemn perfectly innocent things. I represent a young libertarian audience that has nothing to watch on TV. Imagine if you're young and you're slightly left wing, you might watch, pretty much every channel. Any one of the late night shows. All the way up.
You can't find anything in Game of Thrones to make you happy.
Yes, of course, but for those 40 or maybe 50% of the population who feel as though they might lean rightwards, what current affairs shows are there for them out there? I mean, you've got Fox News, the average age of the viewer is 70 plus. There's simply nothing for 3 generations below that. If you are of a conservative bent, and if you're of a very conservative bent, there's nothing anywhere. Now, with the possible exception of Breitbart.
Wouldn't market forces just correct that? In other words, if there's this tremendous appetite in those generations that you're talking about for a certain kind of political speech, I mean, there's a lot of channels in the spectrum right now. Why wouldn't there just be that?
Well, the market,
what's getting in the way of that?
No, the market is correcting it, and it's correcting it in the form of me. And that's why, to answer your first question, it's important that the rest of America who thinks they don't like me understand what they're actually talking about. Most people who object to Milo, who don't like me, are people who only know me from headlines and have never actually come to one of my shows. They've never read a column by me. They've never visited my YouTube channel. They've never read a proper in-depth interview where I've granted somebody access rather than just a comment piece about what an awful bigot I am. They actually have no idea what I believe. They have no idea what I stand for. When I say things like, for instance, I'm quite persuadable on the subject of reparations for slavery. I just wish that it would go, to black schools. Their jaws drop because they had no idea that that I'm this sort of more complex and iconoclastic figure than they were led to believe because they've been lied to by the journalists they trust. So,
is that the reason, or have you done a lot of things that call attention to themselves and obscure? For example, that's a really interesting observation, and you're absolutely right. I would not have associated you with that idea that reparations.
But I've said it in so many interviews. People never do their research. People never read. People have no idea. All you have to do is watch 5 minutes of me on television or in one of my college talks, and there are hundreds of hours of me on YouTube to immediately identify that this is not the person the media is describing. I am not Richard Spencer. I'm not a white supremacist. I'm not a white nationalist. I'm not a bigot, sexist, racist. I'm not any of those things. I am a funny, quirky, interesting, provocative lecturer, author, and journalist. And it just takes 5 minutes of the most cursory research to realize that there's something more interesting happening here, which clearly you and your producers have done because you've invited me on, but most people simply don't. And the slightest bit of research would
But don't you bear some responsibility for that problem? I mean, you described yourself at the outset as trolly. Trolly, to me anyway, means a person who is intentionally causing trouble in a way that's not meant to be productive or to further a conversation, but simply just to get people's dander up. And you've done a lot of that. I mean, aren't you responsible for some of the quote unquote misconceptions about you?
Well, as you'll know by now from reading my book, I like to describe myself as a sort of virtuous troll or a troll for Jesus. Again, that is in itself another troll. But I think that there's a difference between trolling and simply outright meanness and unkindness and bad behavior with no purpose. I like to describe trolls, as they are on the internet today, as the only people who are left telling the truth. Trolls, for me, at least when done properly, done virtuously, done righteously, as I like to think I do it, are the people who can say the uncomfortable truths, the unsayable things that we all know are true but we can't say in public. And it's those Falstaffian figures, it's the jesters, it's the trolls, it's people like me and the people who read my book, in their hundreds of thousands, I'm happy to say, who say things that the rest of America can't for fear of social censure or professional disaster. And yes, I mean, I would be whining about all of this if I thought of myself as a victim, but I don't. I say provocative and outrageous things to get precisely the reaction I do get in order to demonstrate that the American media is really in the business of virtue signaling and policing language and isn't really interested in the truth, isn't really interested in what's actually happening, just wants to spend all of its time deciding who's racist and deciding who's sexist. So I very often do dumb myself down in some of my public proclamations and in some of my interview answers because I want to see who bothers to dig deeper. I want to see who bothers to actually find out the truth. And the answer, I'm sorry to say, in many cases in the mainstream media, certainly in this country, is almost nobody. You know who does look in? My fans, the people who read me, the people who've bought my book, the people who come to my shows. They understand and appreciate there's something far more intelligent and complex and interesting going on in my career. It's journalists whose primary job isn't to speak truth to power or explain what's going on in the country, but rather simply to point at things and yell bigot. Those people don't understand me because they have no interest in doing so. All they want is to call me nasty names as a way of demonstrating their own virtue. Well, that, I think, is a devastating indictment and a completely true picture, I'm sorry to say, again, of the state of the American media. And it's not getting better. It's getting worse. Since the election, American journalists on all of the major broadcast networks and in all of the newspapers are doubling down on the strategy that didn't work for them the last time, doubling down on the stuff that put Donald Trump in the White House. Many of your listeners will be deeply uncomfortable with the current president, but they should be aware that the newspapers they listen to and the TV stations that they watch are in large part responsible for him being there. And second of all, you should be glad that you only got Trump. You should be very relieved that Donald Trump is the worst that happened to this country, because for 30 years the left has been wrongly and hurtfully calling people racists, calling people sexists, calling people homophobes, calling people bigots on the basis of almost no evidence. It has become the primary function and purpose and modus operandi of the American media establishment, is to simply point at things and say sexist, point at things and say racist. That is all your newspapers do.
I have to object to that. I mean, first of all, I work in the American media establishment. I don't spend my days doing that. It would be a very unusual thing for me to do that. Over the course of, 50 weeks of work in a given year, I'd be astonished if I did that more than once or twice, if that at all. And I think that's true of an awful lot of journalists. I think that's a ridiculously blanket statement to say the primary purpose of the American media is to call people racist and sexist.
Look at what young people are reading, because I'm not talking to 65 and 75-year-olds, although many of them like me too. I'm talking to 20-year-olds and 30-year-olds. Do you read BuzzFeed? Do you read Vox? Do you read Mike? Did you read Gawker when it was still alive? Because I think if you were reading the things that young people read, if you were reading Complex, these kind of outlets that publish via Snapchat, for instance, I think you'd have a different view. So it might be possible that I should temper what I just said with a caveat that maybe that's not true for the things that the over 50s or the over 60s listen to. Maybe, Fox and NPR don't do that. But look at the media outlets whose coverage is directed at millennials. And yes, that's exactly what they spend all day doing. That is precisely their primary purpose. It is to police other people's sex lives, to police other people's attitude, to police other people's language. These bitter, miserable, middle-aged bloggers who live in Los Angeles and New York, lecturing the rest of us on how we should live, telling us what's okay and what's not okay, coming up with these bizarre new definitions of racism that say that white people are always racist all the time, even if they don't know it, even if they don't mean to be, even if they're not really, but we'll just say it. And black people can't be racist because of structural disadvantage, all this kind of nonsense dreamed up on college campuses, complete malarkey. But that is the primary business in which the media is engaged. For anybody under 40 who reads anything directed at them, go online, look at also consider this. It isn't just what you say when you're on the air. It's not just what you publish in the pages of the newspaper. I believe the primary impression that the American public gets about journalists isn't from their printed work. It's from what they say on Twitter when they're being a little looser with their language because they think everybody agrees with them. They don't have to get it through an editor. They don't have to worry about so much about defamation. And they can simply just express what they really believe. And you'll see Guardian journalists, you'll see Hollywood scriptwriters, you'll see professors saying all manner of appalling things that they might not at work when their guard is down and they're chatting to people online. And you'll see, for instance, a Guardian journalist saying things like "kill all white men, masculinity so fragile." fragile. I bathe in male tears. This sort of nasty, mean, vindictive, ugly ideology of social justice that has emerged from American college campuses. And this is, they spend all day calling people names. And this,
You realize that Milo Yiannopoulos complaining about other people being nasty, vindictive.
But I'm not a
mean,
hypocrite
vicious,
because I'm not. No, but I'm not a hypocrite. I say I do it, and I explain to you why I'm doing it. They think they're virtuous. I'm perfectly happy to admit that I'm, down there with the pig getting dirty. And I'll also even explain to you my reasoning for doing it. I'll tell you why I'm doing it. But the hypocrisy for me isn't me complaining about name calling. I'm just pointing out that you guys do it too, and they do it. Let's say they do it, and they're hypocrites for doing it. And by the way, they're wrong about everything. But I don't. I'm not pretending to be a feminist, champion of women's rights, a champion of racial justice. I'm a free speech activist and a provocateur and a journalist and an author and an entertainer. And I'm drawing attention to what I see as hypocrisies out there in the world. I am not claiming to lead some kind of social justice movement. Quite the opposite. I want to destroy it because I think it's gone off the rails. So yeah, of course, I call people names too.
I'm looking at Vox.com. So Vox is one of the sites you mentioned. I'm looking at them right now. I'm looking at the front page. I just don't see any of the stuff that you're talking about. I don't see them policing people's language, their sex lives, their racial attitudes. I see a lot of explanatory journalism for the most part.
We obviously see we see very different things because Vox gave up on its mission of neutral explanatory journalism a very, very long time ago. And anyone who is in the slightest bit invested in any of the subjects Vox writes about will tell you, and even left-wingers will admit it, that they have from their original pretense of explaining the world neutrally and factually have lurched to the left, and even their own journalists say so. And these days, what that means is,
but that's a different thing. That's a different thing from what your initial claim was. All they do is police people's sexual attitudes, their racial attitudes.
They do it to everyone. Look at the names they. Look at the names.
But now you're saying that their coverage on substance is to the left. That's something that I could very easily agree with. The first thing is very different. You're equating two things.
I don't think the two are mutually exclusive, and I think that in large part, the project...
They're not mutually exclusive, but they're not the same either.
No, they're not the same, but they're both true. And in large part, the purpose of the political left has become this identity politics-driven social engineering. Think about what's happened to the political left in the West, right? Whether it's the Labour Party in England or the Democrat Party here, they've given up on their old constituencies, and they've given up on being primarily economic arguers. They don't really care too much about, for instance, the white working class. In fact, the Democrat Party is clearly actively hostile to the white working class. And instead, they've created this new coalition. And I talk about this in the book, too, in the first chapter. Instead, they've created this new coalition of women, minorities, immigrants, and everyone else who thinks they've been given a raw shake in life, or anyone who could be persuaded that they might have done. And as a result, they have this sort of vested interest, not only electorally if they work in politics, but culturally, socially, theoretically if they're working in media or in the academy, of talking about this stuff all the time. And I don't think you can plausibly claim that millennial media isn't obsessed with identity. I mean, just look at BuzzFeed. I mean, you chose Vox, fine. They masquerade as an explainer site, and everybody knows better. You just have to spend 2 minutes on there, and you can see what they're up to. But go to BuzzFeed. White people this, black people that, women that, men that. And it is ugly, divisive, hateful stuff. And by the way, the targets are always the same: the poor, straight, white male. Well, it might have been the case. So what's going on here, of course, is that they are correctly crediting straight white men for, doing all the good stuff in history, and then deciding that they're going to be eternal villains and going for them in a way that would not be acceptable about any other group. And I am not here to defend straight people, white people, or men. All I try to do in my talks is to draw attention to the hypocrisy of people who claim to advocate for social justice and equality and diversity and kindness, whilst at the same time speaking about a number of groups in this country in terms that simply would not be acceptable if it were about anyone else. And I really don't, that you can plausibly claim that these millennial news sites, and even also the New York Times, is guilty of this too. The Washington Post is guilty of this too. And I think it is a red thread running through all of American media, all of American journalism. I think it's poisonous. CNN is terrible for this. MSNBC racked through with identity politics. I don't think you can plausibly claim that it isn't a major preoccupation, if not the major preoccupation, of the American media establishment. And secondly, I think the argument is very persuasive that this has been ultimately a force for evil and not a force for good. It has been divisive. It has led these journalists down a road where they can't even see what the real world looks like anymore, leading them into the terrible predictions they made at the last election, and fostering hatred and legitimizing and encouraging movements like Black Lives Matter, which accomplish absolutely nothing except for the destruction of black neighborhoods and all-around misery.
So how is your book not obsessed with identity? It seems to me you've written an entire book that's also obsessed with identity.
Well, of course it is, because I'm commenting on the identity politics industry. My purpose is to knock out...
But you're also commenting on your own identity. I mean, this book is very much a profession of who you are and an explanation of who you are, right? It's a book about your identity.
No, of course, but here's what I had in mind for this book, and here is why I think that I'm so effective. And it's that just by living and breathing, I offer up a refutation of the two things that keep the left in cultural power. One of them is political correctness, and I demonstrate through just living that you don't have to be scared of what you say, and you can be outrageous and be provocative and not necessarily have your life destroyed, or at least that nothing bad happens if you turn around to the skulls.
Didn't you, by your own contention, you lost 3 jobs in an eye blink because of what you said? I mean, isn't your life?
No, well, I mean, I had a hiccup in my career because I said something I didn't intend. Something tumbled out of my mouth I didn't mean, and I apologized for that. But what I'm talking about is people expressing their sincere opinions, or talking about data or studies or whatever, stepping outside the bounds of political correctness. What I accidentally said in that late night live stream wasn't me stepping outside the bounds of political correctness. It was something tumbling out of my mouth that I did not mean and did not intend. So I think that's a different case. But the first thing is living and breathing anti-political correctness. And the second is my whole career is an experiment in identity politics and dedicated to the destruction of them by revealing them as ridiculous. Because what I do is I go out and say, look, I am a gay Jew immigrant who exclusively sleeps with African American men, and I'm really, really right-wing. And I'm, all of these things are true. All of these things are me. But what I'm doing by making it very public and constantly banging on about it, writing about it and speaking about it is showing gay people that they don't have to automatically vote Democrat just because they like the company of other men. I'm showing, I'm trying to demonstrate through my life, using myself as an example, how ridiculous and counterfactual and anti-intellectual identity politics are. The idea that because you have a particular skin color or sexuality or a particular aspect of yourself about which you can do nothing, that you should vote in a particular direction and believe a particular set of ideas. I find that to be utterly ridiculous. And it's something that...
But that's not the newest. I mean, there have been log cabin Republicans for a long time, right? So, I mean, the notion... Isn't it more...
Yes, but they haven't been effective, and I am.
Right.
They haven't done anything.
Effective? How are you effective?
Well, I think that the numbers speak for themselves. The number of followers and fans and enthusiasts I have speak for themselves. I have reached. I'm the gay conservative that reaches parts that others can't. I think because I'm more entertaining, because I'm funnier, because I'm better looking, I'm more popular and successful, and I just have a colossal audience compared to anyone who's done what I'm doing now. They just haven't been as good at it, I don't know why black conservative. There hasn't been I don't know why there's not a black Milo. I don't know why there's not a really funny, waspish, fantastically effective, brilliantly entertaining black conservative as a role model for the black community, saying, look, you don't have to just vote for these people who've done nothing for you. I don't know why that hasn't happened. I don't know why the gay Milo didn't happen before me. Sometimes America needs rescuing, and sometimes you need Europeans to come over here and tell you more about yourselves than you realize, whether it's Alexis de Tocqueville or Christopher Hitchens or me. And I'm just so much better at it than anyone who came before me. And it's, again, another answer to the first question you asked me. And the log cabin Republican types, I'm sure they're all perfectly nice people, but they've just never done anything. And they suffer from the disease that most conservatives in this country have, which is they think that writing essays about something is the same as doing something. Why am I successful? Because I get out of bed I get off my ass, I raise money, I go have a college tour, I write books, and I get out there and I park my pink glittering tanks right on the lawn of the enemy. I get invited by college Republicans to go speak. So I go speak to UC Berkeley, and it is pandemonium. But what happens as a result of that pandemonium is a serious introspection on the part of America's cultural elites about the state of college campuses. You might think I'm clownish. You might even think I'm cruel. You might think I'm unfunny. You might find the whole Milo thing mystifying. But what has the result of Milo been? What is the effect? A national conversation about UC Berkeley and whether college campuses have become too hostile to conservatives. And what happened in the wake of Milo? Fareed Zakaria at Bucknell the commencement address this year. He basically laid waste to the faculty, saying that conservatives were an endangered species on campus, and lectured the professors at Bucknell about including more intellectual diversity on campus. That is a direct result of my influence.
What you're describing to me strikes me as a very, very old debate that's been going on at least since the time of William F. Buckley. And
yes, and conservatives have been losing it until me.
Well, I think
it's a very old debate that
they're
conservatives
suddenly winning because of you.
Well, no, look, it's a very old debate.
It's
a very old debate that conservatives have been having for a long time and been losing for a long time. Now they're not losing. Now we have UC Berkeley as a fiery demonstration, an unavoidable proof of what conservatives have been whinging about, let's be honest, for 30 years in the pages of Commentary magazine and National Review, and doing nothing to fix. Conservatives.
My guess is Berkeley is going to be exactly the same place as it was 2 years ago, 2 years from now. I'd be astonished if you have any lasting effect
listen, I
on
don't
the
aspire
ethos of UC Berkeley.
Well, I mean, I'm going to hold a free speech week there this week. This year in September, we're going to spend $500,000 having a massive. We're going to make it the epicenter of free speech in this country. So I don't know. I mean, watch and see. And I'll come back on in 6 months and you tell me whether you're impressed or not. But certainly, I'm not aspiring to change the fabric, the culture of UC Berkeley, of all places, overnight. But the discussion that is prompted by what I do, by UC Davis, UW Seattle, UC Berkeley, all of the campuses that were electrified and in some cases set fire to, merely because a guy wanted to show up and say a gay guy didn't like Black Lives Matter very much, didn't like feminism very much, and wanted to crack a few jokes. Let's be completely clear about what we're saying. This is a guy whose opinions are perfectly within the respectable, reasonable conservative mainstream. I, Milo, do not believe anything weird or wacky or hateful. I believe things that you could see on Fox, that you could read in National Review. I just express myself in a much more effective, much more persuasive, and much more charismatic way. And for that reason, I'm effective, and that's why they hate me so much, and that's why they smash the place up when I show up.
Some of the ways that you say things are beyond the bounds of what would be ordinary political or social discourse.
Who cares? George
will.
People
nobody's ever. Care. You got banned from Twitter because people did care, right?
Yes, but what I'm saying, it's another tremendous victory, because the people who actually followed me, the people who actually pay attention to me, were outraged, and that single thing, me getting banned from Twitter, was the moment you knew the social network was doomed. It was the moment the company was finished, because it demonstrated that they would. I mean, first of all, they took my checkmark away, and the sort of petty act of vandalism, just to sort of like give me a slap on the wrist or whatever, a mechanism that is supposed to protect the identity of public figures. And at that time, I don't think there was anybody more impersonated on the internet than me, except maybe Beyonce. And they took it away just to be petty, to be pathetic, and then waited until they could use something that would satisfy their own side, and they thought they could sort of slide out a ban under the cover of, I don't know, it was just a remarkable, bizarre episode in which, that company was feeding false information to journalists, pretending that I had made racially charged comments that I did not make, pretending, that I had said things to Leslie Jones that I did not say. And to this day, not one single media outlet has corrected falsehoods, despite me writing to them extensively, about what went down around the Leslie Jones thing. They all lied about it, and they in some cases did so knowingly, which is again another part of what I talk about all the time, which is the purposeful, deliberate mendacity of the left wing press in this country. When you declare politics to the right of Jane Fonda, you become you become a public enemy and you become fair game. And I've just decided that I'm going to be completely outrageous. I'm going to say whatever I want. I'm going to say whatever I want about whoever I want. I'm going to be spiteful and bitchy and mean, and I'm going to try to be as funny as I can through the whole thing. And I'm going to do one thing in addition to all of that, which is always tell the truth.
So here you have the floor. What did you say about Leslie Jones? What didn't you say about Leslie Jones?
So most of the reports say, first of all, that I led a harassment campaign against Leslie Jones. Utterly false. What I did was publish a review of the Ghostbusters movie on Breitbart. And the review was very withering about the movie, but I actually defended Leslie Jones in the review. I said that I found it a shame that she was, expected to play this minstrel-like character, this stereotypical sassy black woman character. And I said in the review, which again surprises people because they've never read it, I said in the review, it would be nice if we get to a stage in movies, in cinema, where somebody could just happen to be black and don't have to play a tired black stereotype. And I said, if I were a social justice warrior, I might be quite offended by the sort of tired, low-rent stereotypes that she's perpetuating on screen. Fortunately, I'm not. But I will just say it would be nice if we got to that stage. People are stunned when I tell them that because they've never read the review. Then on Twitter, I made a few jokes at her expense. I said she looked like, she looked like a dude, and she does. I said that she was, her tweets were barely literate. They are. Go read them for yourself. She can barely use the English language. I'm entitled to say that about a celebrity. You might not find it particularly worthwhile or highbrow or interesting commentary, but I'm entitled to do that, and if you don't want to read it, tune out. If you do want to read it, come to my shows. For Twitter to feed to journalists, for journalists to credulously and willingly write up that A, I staged a harassment campaign, and B, then you go to the more disreputable outlets like Vox and BuzzFeed, who will just simply print, knowing that it isn't true, that I tweeted racist memes or that I said racist things to Leslie Jones. Absolutely categorically untrue, and they've never been able to provide a single tweet or piece of evidence because it didn't happen. That's the kind of stuff that makes people vote Trump, frankly. That's the kind of stuff that makes people really angry.
Let me just offer a contrast here. So, not unreasonably, you say, look, you would just like to be held accountable for things that you actually said or tweeted, not accountable
come to me for the things I actually do, because there are enough of them. You don't have to invent things.
Right. So accountable for those things, but not accountable for things that people do in your name or things that people do because they think you might have started some kind of fire or gotten some kind of
look, Justin Bieber tweets about Selena Gomez and she gets 50,000 death threats. Do we hold him responsible? And he does so knowing that that they've just broken up in a very public way, and that his fans are going to tweet death and rape threats against her. He does so knowingly. It's far closer to incitement than anything I've ever done. Same thing with Beyonce and Taylor Swift. And by the way, Leslie Jones specifically violated the piece of Twitter policy that they say I violated, which I didn't, which is incitement, with words like "get her" with 4 exclamation marks under it. She specifically and deliberately put her followers on certain tweeters that hurt her feelings. She actually did blatantly, flagrantly, categorically violate the policies that Twitter said wrongly that I violated. And what does this tell you? It tells you that Twitter cares more about identity politics than reality. Because she's left-wing, and she's black, and she's a woman, she can do no wrong. That is counterfactual. It's ludicrous. Most Americans hate it, and that is why Trump is in the White House.
Would a person who's associated with Black Lives Matter be fair in saying, you know what, Milo kind of does the same thing to us? In other words, we started this movement. It was really about shootings of black citizens by police, about traffic stops, about stuff like that. But because of the other things that other people do, not us, and not traceable to any specific thing that we've said, he denounces us. He says we're turning into a terrorist organization. He associates us with all kinds of things that other people do, possibly feeling that they're inspired by what we do, but certainly not with our blessing. I mean, you want the same thing, right? You won't want to be held accountable for what you do and say.
Yeah, well, I'm holding them accountable for specific lies they tell people. Like I hold the media account. I did not tell anyone to do anything to Leslie Jones. I cracked a few jokes and wrote a disobliging review. And then some people on the internet posted horrible, ugly, disgusting things about her, which in every interview I've ever been asked about, I have said I find absolutely horrible, right, and distasteful, and I wish people wouldn't do it, okay? But it's not my job to police the rest of the world, and I'm not going to get involved in that, because then I just, have my own set of what's okay and what's not okay. I think everything's okay, and people, that means that there are consequences for free speech. What you have to be held accountable for what you say, but you only have to be accountable for what you say. And Black Lives Matter tells lies to people and gins them up and winds them. I mean, there's no other movement in the country that is consistently followed by violence and bloodshed. Well, why is this happening? They're not just like innocent Presbyterians wandering around saying Jesus was cool. They are ginning people up, telling people lies. What I say about Black Lives Matter. Well, what I say about Black Lives Matter in the book, to be specific, is that if they really cared about Black lives, they would focus on other things. They were, if you're a black activist, right? You are. What I say two things actually. One is that they're totally ineffective and actually just counterproductive, because all that has come from Black Lives Matter is black neighborhoods in flames and nothing else, and a bit more racial division and hatred and hostility, right? And second of all, that their priorities are wrong. Okay, that's what I say in the book. Their priorities are wrong. If they actually cared about black lives, if you're a black activist, you've got money, you're getting some money from George Soros, whatever you're doing, and your priority is to stop black people being killed. You don't go for the police. The police are like the number one thing saving black lives in this country. They're the ones, and where the police withdraw as a result, in the Ferguson effect, more black people get killed. If you really believed that you wanted to save black lives, if your priority was really fewer dead black bodies, you do two things. One of them is that you would advocate for the defunding of Planned Parenthood, and the second is that you would support the police. And instead, Black Lives Matter gins up hatred and violence toward the police, and then steps back and pleads innocence afterwards. And this is, my
I can subject a
observation.
lot of things to that kind of critique. I mean, for example, if Donald Trump wanted to save American lives,
Yes.
save the most possible American lives, going after homegrown domestic terrorism or even terrorism brought in by people who have refugee or immigrant status, that's not a particularly effective way to save American lives. That's not how people die in America.
No, but
Since
I don't
9/11,
think
there's been
he's
a
ever said,
tiny number.
But the stated purpose of Black Lives Matter is to save black lives. The clue's in the name. Donald Trump doesn't say that his stated purpose is to save American lives. What Donald Trump says in his speeches, as he just did in Poland, is that he wants to save Western civilization. And to do that, and that is a conversation about values, a conversation about who we have and who we don't have in our countries. And for me, as a gay man, and I was there at Pulse nightclub in Orlando just afterwards. I've come from London, which is a complete horror story. As a gay man, I am very comfortable with the so-called Muslim ban. I am very comfortable with, a suspicion of people coming from Middle Eastern cultures that want to murder me and oppress my mom and my female friends. Very comfortable with that. Donald Trump's stated purpose, as we now know in that fantastic speech in Poland, is to save Western civilization. Well, if he wants to save Western civilization, what's the number one threat to it? Islam. So for me, he's doing a good job. Black Lives Matter, as they kind of advertise in the name, want to save black lives. Well, if they really believe that, they should be supporting the police, not inciting murder, not inciting not standing by innocently claiming to just be an anti-racism organization and to be fighting structural, racism and all blah 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 blah. Meanwhile, ginning people up to kill police officers.
But you're not really suggesting that Donald Trump has never invoked the issues of safety and safeguarding American lives as justification for some of his anti-Muslim policies, for some of his anti-Muslim rhetoric.
I don't believe that
would be an insane thing for you to say.
I don't believe that he has anti-Muslim
the fact that he said something
policies,
in Warsaw the other day doesn't mean...
Well, I don't think he has anti-Muslim policies. I think he has anti-terrorism policies. It just happens to be, I'm sorry to tell you, that all the terrorist countries are Muslim. But I don't think that's fair. But there's also no reason why he can't have multiple explanations for doing the same good thing. And
he certainly does.
Well, fine, and maybe
right?
they're all good reasons. You'd have to talk to him about that. You can interview him, but from my point of view, I'm very relaxed about the reasons he offers. I think they're all perfectly persuasive enough. And as I say to you, this won't be popular with all of your listeners. It won't even be popular with all of your producers. We're about to get hauled out here for hate speech or something. As a gay man, I am totally relaxed with a permanent ban on more Muslims coming into the West. And people will find that extreme. People will find that outrageous. It's probably going to be the subject of my next book. But Donald Trump's stated purpose is the safety and continued flourishing and success and security and beauty of Western civilization. I think that's wonderful, and I think that he's entirely right to identify Islamist terrorism as the primary threat to that.
Although, wouldn't it make sense as a gay man to try to figure out first what's the biggest danger to gay men in America? And try to address that.
Of course, and that's the other reason I'm so mad with the gay establishment, because they don't talk about HIV and AIDS anymore. They're obsessed with transgender pronouns instead. Part of the reason being that all these organizations are now run by lesbians who don't care about HIV and AIDS because they don't themselves catch it. Stonewall in the UK, the most ancient gay charity, is now run by a lesbian and talks about barely anything except transgender pronouns. The Terence Higgins Trust, literally an HIV charity, now talks about transgender pronouns. Who cares? Who cares? There were 40,000 new HIV infections in, I think, 2015. And they don't they don't want to talk about that anymore because it's not as
sexy. To use your logic about Trump, why can't they talk about both? Why can't they be concerned about AIDS and transgender rights?
Of course they can, but it would be nice if we got the sense that they had some reasonable priorities, and I don't think they do. And the nail in the coffin for me was Orlando, a Pulse nightclub, when every liberal, let's not tar all liberals with the brush, but every progressive, every social justice warrior, every Hollywood celebrity who pronounced on the subject, every politician, every gay charity was sort of racing to Twitter to say, don't let this stoke up Islamophobia, and, love wins. Well, love doesn't win. AK-47s win, and AK-47s in the hands of murderous Muslim maniacs who were brainwashed and radicalized here in America is the thing that you need to watch out for. And, it's like the whole left-wing establishment is like desperate for you not to look behind the curtain and not to say these things. I mean, it's, look, I posted on Facebook about the Ariana Grande concert in Manchester where, another one of these Islamic lunatics blew up a bunch of young women and gays who were there to listen to Ariana Grande and watch her, shaking her tush and listen to terrible music. I mean, fine, they should be able to do what they want, despite their bad taste, without threats, without the worry that they're going to get blown up. And I said on Facebook, Ariana Grande should name the enemy. Imagine how powerful it would have been if a star of her magnitude had said something about not Islam, not Muslims, but about radical Islam. Imagine if she said this ideology is dangerous and it is against the values we all believe in, like love and freedom and tolerance and respect. Don't get sucked into this. And maybe she could have avoided 10,000 people joining ISIS? Who even knows what the effects of that would have been? It would have been really brave for her, but instead she fell back on this asinine, sort of rictus grin, anodyne, funless, love wins, I'm so gutted, let's all just love each other and stop the hate. What does that even mean? No, let's stop radical Islam. And the left doesn't want to talk about this. Facebook made me take those posts down. And there was nothing remotely rude or cruel or offensive about anything, but I had disagreed with their two favorite groups, which is pop stars and Muslims. So, they made me take the posts down. You can't. This is what conservatives are so upset about. You can't express yourself on Facebook or Twitter without getting banned or censured in some way. You don't see your opinions reflected or your concerns reflected in the media. When you express yourself, you're called a hateful, bigot, sexist, racist, homophobe, whatever. You've been sort of systematically silenced by Hollywood, by the media, and by academia. And it's very clear. I don't think you can make the argument that that's not true anymore. 20 years ago, when conservatives said that, perhaps they were being ridiculous, but they're not anymore. And that's why people like me so much. And that's why people put Donald Trump in the White House.
Before we run out of time, your new book, Dangerous, I know you're now in litigation with Simon & Schuster. Tell us about that. What happened with your book? Your book's out now, and
it is and doing phenomenally well. Yeah, it's really great. We're very happy. So it's misreported in the media as self-published. Of course, they say that as in a sort of demeaning way to try to suggest that you're just, you've got this sort of nasty, cheap, on-demand paperback coming out. Well, no, I've actually invested $3 million in starting my own imprint, Dangerous Books, and we're going to publish a lot of people besides just me. So the first book from Dangerous is my book Dangerous, and it's selling phenomenally well. What I did do is Simon & Schuster. I got cancelled from CPAC over the comments that you mentioned earlier on, where I sort of stumbled into saying something I didn't mean about. I was talking about how gay men grow up and sometimes find older role models, and there's sometimes a sexual component to that. And something tumbled out of my mouth that I didn't quite intend. So I apologize for that, and took my licks, as it were, right? But Simon & Schuster seem to have used that as an opportunity to break the contract I had with them pretextually. They 24 hours before they dumped my book, they were saying how good the manuscript was, how much they liked it. They were grateful for all the hard work I did. They were looking forward to marketing it. "You done good" was the text I got from the editor, and then 24 hours later, we got a letter from them saying that the manuscript was suddenly, abruptly unfit for publication. Well, I think what actually happened was they caved to pressure from the left and used the opportunity of a little slip-up from me to cancel my book deal. But the thing is, the only thing I had lost prior to that was a speaking gig at CPAC, which is a very obscure little political conference for like 23-year-old dorks in bow ties who'd invited me to inject a bit of star power into proceedings and then retracted that, because whatever they like to say, they do still have a bit of a problem with gays, and me talking loosely in a way that I perhaps shouldn't have about relationships between gay men of very different ages was too much for their evangelical board to bear, and they said, no, we're not having Milo. That didn't do me any harm. But Simon & Schuster cancelling my book, using it as an excuse to break the contract pretextually.
Simon & Schuster publishes Rush Limbaugh. I mean, they're not afraid of publishing conservative voices.
No, that's not where they had no idea what was going to come down on them when they announced my deal. No Simon & Schuster author has had remotely close to the response from the left that I did. Not the same level of boycotts, not even close. Not by an order of magnitude. Not even close. I am by far the most... Well, because I'm by far the most controversial.
I think your problems are self-created. I think you cause all this trouble, and then you get upset that it causes you trouble.
You describe them as problems. I don't think they're problems at all. What I will do, however, is make sure that Simon & Schuster understands that they should not sign deals with conservatives and libertarians unless they're prepared to see through on their obligations. And they backed out of the deal pretextually, and they have to pay for that because that had knock-on effects. What happened when I lost my book deal was there was a sort of implication then that I was somehow unfit to be published by one of the big five publishers, which is clearly untrue from reading the book. Read the book and you will see that it is clearly untrue. 100,000 people have bought the book already, and I don't even have the latest numbers. I haven't had the latest numbers for a while because we can't print them fast enough. Clearly untrue. You think hundreds of thousands of Americans are going to sign? I'm not Richard Spencer. If Richard Spencer released a book, he'd sell about 4,000 copies, and it would top out because that's how many white nationalists there are in the world. But my book is selling, comfortably, easily, sailing into six figures. Right? It's very clear that they just didn't want the level of opprobrium and noise and drama and controversy that I attracted. And why do I attract that? Partly because of what I say, but mostly because I'm really effective and the left is scared of me. They are really, really worried because if gay men can do it, maybe women will be next, and then maybe black people will be after that. And suddenly the victimhood-driven identity politics coalition that the Democrat Party has put together over the last 30 years might suddenly come crashing down. And what will they have left then? Because they've given up on the white working class in America. They've given up on the working class in general, to be honest. They've never done anything for the black community, despite constantly pandering to them. What will happen then when they don't have gays or women or immigrants or Muslims or blacks or anyone else left? They've given up on the working class. The party will evaporate. So I am the most effective weapon for people who believe that identity politics is garbage and must end. And I'm the most effective weapon for people who believe that you should be able to say, do, and be whatever you want, which is, enshrined in that incredibly controversial thing we know as the First Amendment. I'm the best and most effective warrior for those two things, and that's why the left hates me so much. And that is why they came for Simon & Schuster. I'm the most controversial person ever to get a deal with Simon & Schuster. And that ultimately, I believe, is why Simon & Schuster crumbled. Well, they're not entitled to do that because they signed a deal with me. They should never have offered me a book deal in the first place if they weren't prepared for the heat that was going to come. And I warned them repeatedly. They didn't listen. They were arrogant, and that's okay. But they got to pay. They got to either stick to the deal or they got to pay up. Because what happened to me afterwards was, set back my plans. I want to be the right-wing Bill Maher one day. And what Simon & Schuster did could have put me back 3 years. That could have cost me tens of millions of dollars. So Simon & Schuster has to pay.
Oh, I wouldn't want to be the anything Bill Maher. Milo Yiannopoulos, it has been fun to visit with you. Thanks so much for taking the time. The book is dangerous.
Thank you so much.
Thanks for spending time with me.
Thanks for having me.
All right, great. Thanks.
Was that okay?
Was good.
Terrific.
Yeah.
All right, thank you.
Okay.
Nice to talk to you. Take care. Bye.
Yes.
Should do interviews on 2 hours of sleep more often.